Hey kids, it's Robert E. Howard in 3D. I can see in 3D with these glasses too. This is Todd Luck coming at you from the third dimension, and this is a video on comics featuring Robert E. Howard characters in 3D. Robert E. Howard is, of course, the creator of Conan, and so the comics include his other barbarian king, Kull, which is Kull 3D 1 and 2. And his Puritan adventurer, Solomon Kane, who is in Solomon Kane 3D. There's also a one-shot of Red Sonja 3D, and of course Red Sonja is Robert E. Howard related because she premiered in the Conan comics from Marvel. Just like 3D movies, 3D printing, and 3D comics have been around a long time and are constantly making comebacks. In the 90s, DC Comics came out with Batman 3D with a story by John Byrne that even had its own exclusive Bat 3D glasses. Also in the 90s, Valiant came out with the Valiant Vision glasses, which didn't use the traditional red and blue lenses, but could work with any color comic. The glasses brought out colors like red and made them pop out, and pushed back colors like blue and made them pushed back to the background, and they actually colored several issues specifically to take advantage of that effect if you wore the glasses. Now, the comics we're talking about today are actually from the 80s, and they're from a company called Blackthorne. Blackthorne was known for publishing a few different things, including comic strip reprints. I've already done a separate review of their Tarzan comic strip reprints. They also put out regular comics of licensed properties like Battle Beast and Battletech. And of course, they also put out 3D comics, which they were probably best known for, and they would oftentimes be of properties that had no other comic books to their name, like Bravestar. They even had a 3D comic of the California Raisins. You remember those guys? But probably the most interesting thing is that in a time when licensing agreements tended to be exclusive, there were loopholes for 3D comics. And so they were able to do comics that were already licensed to other companies of properties like Transformers and G.I. Joe. And of course, that applied to the Robert E. Howard characters as well, who at the time were being published by Marvel. And so to answer some of your questions, this is what 3D artwork looks like to the naked eye. I can't really show you what it looks like with the glasses on, but trust me, there is a very impressive 3D effect there. These comics will work with any traditional 3D glasses that have the red and blue lenses in them. You can get them with the comics or just a random pair of 3D glasses you have. You can even use your Batman 3D glasses if you want. And if you're like me and you wear glasses, if you put the 3D glasses over your regular glasses, they work just fine. And I know you're wondering if these comics were ever reprinted as just regular comics, just 2D comics. And as far as I can tell, I don't think that Blackthorne printed their 3D comics as just regular comics. The only exception I was able to find was an original creation called Slimba. And this is by Steve Perry, who created Silverhawks, and artwork by Paul Chadwick, who of course did the exceptional Concrete comic series. And this is mystical, like dark fantasy jungle adventure. It's actually pretty good. And it did come out in 3D for 2 issues, and they reprinted it in this little graphic novel, but this is the only exception I found. And as far as I can tell, these comics that were originally printed in 3D by Blackthorne are not available in any type of modern collections or digitally or facsimile editions or anything like that. Unfortunately, the nature of the 3D printing would make it very difficult to reprint it unless you had the original artwork. And the fact that it was printed by another company than the company that printed the rest of those comics, right? You know, when you're looking at something like Solomon Kane or Kull, probably also makes it difficult to reprint these comics. And Slimba was the only exception I found to that, because there is a modern collection of that came out several years ago. And no, for some reason, they did not do any 3D comics of Conan. To my recollection, I rarely saw any Blackthorne comics in my local comic shops. The only exception that I can think of back in the day was this issue of Dick Tracy. This was their comic strip reprints, but I have rarely seen them in back issues. My impression is that they probably had less distribution than other bigger companies. And that does mean that sometimes their issues are a little bit harder to find and a little bit more expensive. Most of the comics that I've shown you aren't too bad. I wasn't able to find a copy of Solomon Kane 3D for less than $25. Oftentimes the sellers were from overseas. It's just one of those harder issues to find. And the prices on Red Sonja 3D are just crazy. I'm seeing prices over $60 or over $100 on eBay, and that's why I do not have that issue. Lastly, let me address the Blackthorne cover curse. They have the weirdest covers on their comics. Just looking at them, you would think these guys don't know what they're doing. Even when decently rendered, either the composition or the subject matter is just head scratching oftentimes. And even when they get the composition right, sometimes they'll mess up on the coloring, like Bullwinkle here being 1,000 shades too dark. But do not let that fool you on Blackthorne comics. The artwork on the inside is usually 1,000% professional and looks spot on to the subject matter. This looks like it came straight out of a Bullwinkle episode. And the same thing is true of Brave Star. It looks straight out of the cartoon. It is amazing stuff and definitely recommended if you're a Brave Star fan. You want to pick up those 2 3D issues. And the same thing is true of the Solomon Kane and Kull 3D issues. The artwork is on par with anything Marvel was doing at the time. So one of the reasons for the weirdness of some of these covers is that they were originally used as advertisements to promote the issue inside of the 3D comics. Imagine this in 3D with all of this stuff popping out at you and you're able to see layers of depth and stuff. It's a pretty impressive image. It just kind of loses that when you put it in 2D on the cover. Now, that still doesn't explain why they chose the subject matter that they did for the covers sometimes, like Solomon Kane just looking at a jar. But just keep in mind, you're getting this for what's between the covers. So to briefly address each of these issues, Solomon Kane 3D is a pretty cool story. Solomon Kane encounters supernatural evil while on a ship, and it is a good story, and it feels well researched. It fits right in with Solomon Kane's stories by Robert E. Howard. And then there's Kull 3D issue 1. Conan encounters some supernatural evil while on a hunting trip, and I thought this one was just kind of okay, but it's still a pretty good story. The highlight to me is the second issue of Kull 3D, and this is actually a really clever, quirky little story. And so it begins with Cole surviving an assassination attempt and waking up without any memory. And you know how in these stories, usually the character is found by someone who helps them out, nurses them back to health. None of that here. He's found by a couple guys who are disappointed he didn't have anything on him that they could steal. And so they decide to sell him into slavery. And it goes from there. No supernatural evil, just a really interesting, amusing premise. So I think both of the Cole issues and Solomon Kane are worth picking up if you're fans of those characters. Red Sonja is probably good too, I just can't vouch for that. However, one more thing you might want to consider picking up if you're looking for dark fantasy, barbarian kind of stories is 3D Heroes. This is all original stories. This is 3 original short stories in this issue, and this is probably the coolest cover that Blackthorne put out. I mean, it really fits in with that dark fantasy motif. The stories are pretty good, and the artwork is excellent. And the thing about them being just self-contained original short stories without any licensed characters or any ongoing characters is it adds to the unpredictability. You're not quite sure what's going to happen, right? Who's going to make it out alive, what condition they're going to be in, and the middle story has a really great twist to it that really sticks with me. And so while you're hunting down those other issues, you might want to keep an eye out for this one too. All right, that's it. Goodbye from the third dimension as I come out of your screen. Like and subscribe for more videos. And until next time, see ya.